Senator Julian Cyr joins us in studio with news about additional funds for education coming to the Cape and Islands. Beacon Hill is back in session, and it's a full slate of activities for September and October. With me today, Senator Julian Cyr. So much going on, right?
Absolutely. First of all, happy local summer.
I know,
it's
right?
We just had a beautiful weekend, yeah, gosh, just enjoy every bit of it. But we're back in session, and big things are happening. So I sit on the Education Committee. I'm the only member of the Cape and Islands delegation on that committee. We've been working for months on a compromise looking at the Chapter 70 funding formula. This is how the state funds public education, K through 12 education. There was something several years ago called the Foundation Budget Review Commission. Foundation budget's essentially how we calculate who gets what. There was a series of recommendations, and that has prompted us to do work on this piece of legislation, which is arguably the most significant we've seen since the early 90s when education reform was passed. For me, as someone, actually, I was a product of that education reform. I was going through elementary school and middle and high school when we made those investments. So here's what this is. This is a $1.4 billion investment in K through 12 public education over the next 7 years. We are fully funding the Foundation Budget Review Commission's recommendations. So this is around supports for healthcare costs, English language learners, special education costs, other liabilities that school districts have. But we actually are going further. And we're starting with supports for low-income students. Under the old plan, students were only counted as low income up to 130% of the federal poverty limit, or poverty level, excuse me. Under this bill, we go to 180%. We very much increase the supports for English language learning students, and we make sure the incentives start currently. If you are an English language student, we give you more money if you're an English language student who's in elementary school versus someone who's in high school. If you're someone who's coming in and you're in first or second grade, you actually have the ability to learn language a lot quicker. Right. So we're inverting that. There's a whole host of things in here. I'm glad to walk you through more of it. Right. This means really big things, especially for the town of Barnstable, which has a number of low-income students and has a number of English language students. This is going to mean big things for Barnstable. We're probably going to see a pretty significant increase. We already saw a very significant increase in the FY20 budget for Barnstable, nearly an additional $1 million that came just to Barnstable because of these investments. This is going to be continuing. So the bill was put out from committee. We're going to be taking it up in the Senate in the coming weeks, and it means a whole host of big things.
Okay. So I know just from our conversations with the superintendent that English learners are actually the fastest growing segment, well over 10% in the town of Barnstable. And just one of our elementary schools, Hyannis West, has 40% of their population that are English learners. So when we talk about this as per student, translate that into something that's tangible for the resident to understand that money. You can talk the dollars, but we look at that. Is that more teachers? Is it more supplemental types of things, classes? Is it more textbooks?
Yeah. Well, we leave it up to the school districts largely how to make these investments. There are some important accountability metrics here, but we're not trying to actually add too many more requirements onto schools. I think the conventional wisdom, is that we've gone too far in that. So yeah, it supports for, it's basically saying to the school districts, look, we know it's going to cost more money to educate someone who's an English language learner than not. We know that it actually costs more money to provide equitable education for low-income students than versus students who have more resources at home and in their community. So that's what we're trying to acknowledge here. It's going to mean a pretty significant increase for this town. It's going to mean a pretty significant increase for the Dennis-Yarmouth district as well, which they need some help as well. And this is something we've been working on for months, actually. In the early summer, Superintendent Mayo Brown convened a group of educators and parents from across the region. We met at Barnstable High School, talking about these issues. Senator Jason Lewis, who's the Senate chair of the Education Committee, came down, made a presentation, got a lot of feedback. But essentially what this bill is aiming to do is say, no matter where you live in the Commonwealth, you're going to have an equitable education, right? So whether you live in Wellesley or in Chelsea, right, we're going to provide an equitable education. We're currently not doing that. And we're really leaving a lot of children behind. And that's the case here on Cape Cod as well. What this bill also does, a few other important things. The special education support is enhanced. Currently, there's something called the Special Education Circuit Breaker. This provides reimbursement up to 70% of special ed costs. It only included the instruction. It never included transportation. Under this bill, we include transportation. That is huge for Cape Towns. We also have a commission that looks at the needs of rural schools and school districts that have declining enrollment. That's not as big of a concern in Barnstable, but it's a big concern in my neck of the woods.
Sure. On
the Outer Cape, it's a big concern on the islands. And then we also are putting in place some new metrics to evaluate school districts, to make sure there's a little more accountability. And what I'm really excited about is there's also a pretty rapid study to really look at how the formula is calculated, how we calculate the local contribution, because the challenge we've always had is the current formula takes into account property values. Our property values are far inflated over what our income is, right? There's a disconnect there because of our second and third home market. So I'm excited for that part of this bill as well, because I think it'll further help Cape Cod get our fair share. But this is a very big deal, $1.4 billion over the next 7 years. We also lift the cap for the Mass School Building Authority, which we've got important projects coming in the pipeline here in our communities for schools. That means more money for towns to either renovate schools or to build new schools. Public education, look, this is the best investment we can make. Right. I'm someone who's a product of an amazing public school education in K through 12, and I think I'm really proud to be part of this initiative and this process. We're going to take up this bill. It's going to pass. We've got a little more negotiating to do, but it's a big deal, and it's going to really help some of the neediest families and kids on Cape Cod. And I'm really proud of that.
Right. So you also mentioned healthcare. Where does that fit in? Is that to maybe help towns with the rising costs? Because as everyone knows, that municipalities are facing that cost year in and year out of rising healthcare for their workforce.
Exactly. So the existing formula never took into account how astronomically quickly health insurance costs would rise. This is health insurance for workforce. So the bill does that. It actually is much more honest about the true cost to the district.
Okay. Fantastic.
There's also money in there to we expand the amount of resources that go to guidance counselors and social emotional learning and mental health. This is increasingly a really big need in our schools, and the formula currently just doesn't really account for that need. We're going to increase funding under that.
Right.
This bill through
and
that.
Social emotional learning, again, talking to Gina Hurley from the Barnstable School System, they're starting to get the data in for this initiative of really taking children from, basically kindergarten right up through high school and having them understand the social part and the emotional part of growing and learning at the same time. It's a great, fantastic work.
Well, and it's essential, right? If you're
Right.
coming to school and you're dealing with a whole host of anxiety or depression or challenges or fears, just like you're not going to be able to learn well if you didn't have breakfast that morning. Right. If you're dealing with that stuff, you're not going to be as successful. Right. And so I think I'm really proud that we're also looking at those issues too, because I think they really matter.
Okay. I know you have other things that are definitely to talk about. We could talk about this all day, and maybe that'll be a long-form interview that we sit down and really
sink our teeth into this. We'll get the numbers. My sense is Barnstable is going to see a pretty significant increase in the reimbursement we receive, and that's going to mean really good things for folks here.
Fantastic. Yeah. What else you got there?
So, really important, we always are talking about PFAS, and this, of course, is all day long PFAS. There is an effort underway. We have a supplemental budget in front of us that the governor filed. He proposes a number of investments financially in this. I'm supportive of that effort. And what we're trying to do is to take the bill on PFAS. I filed a bill with Representative Kate Hogan, who represents Stowe, sort of like central northern Massachusetts, to have a task force to us to really look at this issue. We're now trying to get that done in the supplemental budget. So stay tuned on that, but we're on PFAS. And then continuing to work, as you know, I'm the Senate chair of the Joint Committee on Mental Health, Substance Abuse, and Recovery. We just had a hearing on highly addictive drugs and benzos, which is something there's a lot of concern about. We've had 2 hearings since Labor Day. We got a few more hearings coming up, trying to really advance that work. And then we're really trying to look more broadly at mental health. I don't call it a mental health system because I think we actually don't have a system implies a connectivity and coordination. We've got the component parts, and so we're trying to figure out, all right, how do you really transform mental health and make sure that there's true parity between medical, surgical care, and behavioral health, mental health. So more to come on that.
Okay.
And then just want to remind folks as well, we have had an ongoing public health. We've had an ongoing public health, I don't know if it's a crisis, but an issue of concern related to Eastern equine encephalitis, which we have been seeing here on Cape Cod.
Another one this past week in
I think 9 folks actually, unfortunately, have been infected with triple E in Massachusetts. The nights are getting colder, which is good. The risk is diminishing, but there still is risk. So really encourage folks to reach out to your local health department, take certain precautions. We're not out of the woods yet, but this is a significant issue, and one given the number of triple E positive mosquitoes we've seen on the Cape, from Mashpee to Truro. Really urge people to be vigilant about this.
Right, and we know even from Gabrielle Sokolowski, who is the mosquito control here in the Barnstable County, just empty the standing water, folks.
Yeah.
It's really a little bit as simple as that, as if you have containers, your neighbors have containers, little pools. Nobody's in the pool. Well, they were in the pool this weekend, but maybe not for the rest of the week. But, the kiddie
warm.
Pools and things like that, really, and be vigilant while you're out there. Wear protective sprays and clothing.
Fortunately, we're getting cooler nights, and that's going to help.
Right.
But we're not out of the woods yet.
Excellent.
Great.
Thanks so much,
Always
Julian.
a pleasure, Paula. Thank you.
Take care. Bills filed.